What I want to do really is, I do talks about self-build, but what I'd like to do is actually look at it slightly wider, so I don't get bogged down in kind of building systems and houses and things, but look at some of the wider things that come out of it really, and use that as some examples, and at the end what I want to do is just sort of look at what you have to put in place for those things to succeed. Because a very successful self-build scheme is really good. A really bad one, which I'll talk about at the end, is actually a disaster. So I want to kind of look at what would be in place and what sort of things people get out of it, more than just the house. Rather, the house is obviously the main thing, but there's a lot more to it than that. So I've called it more than just building a home. Some of these shots John's used as well, so we'll do that. But it sort of started for me. I built my own house on one of the schemes that John showed earlier in Lewisham. I was involved with community arts at the time, and that's how I got involved later. But the first scheme in Lewisham, which John was a self-builder on and worked as the architect, and the Kenny Atkins, who he referred to there, group of very ordinary council tenants, mostly council tenants, looking to build their own houses in a fairly disparate range of sites all around Lewisham. So it wasn't one big site, lots of small sites dotted around the place. But again, what was interesting, that Ken Atkins, who was chairing that, was a Deptford lad. He was a floor layer. He got very involved in it. He became really passionate about it, and that's how, I'll tell you, he came to us in the end. But he was very passionate about it, and he went on to do a whole range of things. He got really going out and giving talks. They made a video about the scheme because it was very innovative at the time, so they made this video about it. They went out and met with other groups, talked to councils and people like that. He ended up going to the United Nations, Ken did, to get some award. I can't remember what it was, but he went with Prince Charles and got an award. And he went on to run courses about it and was just very, very passionate. It completely changed his life. He became a very different sort of person. He was very upfront and very forceful, and he got a lot of things done. A huge change in his lifestyle because that. He still ended up with floor laying, but he was doing these other things as well. And it was the major thing in his life. And either him or one of the other groups always quoted this line of saying that after doing this, no one will ever tell me I can't do something again, because it was such a big thing for them. They made a video about the scheme, and I was working in a community arts video project at the time. And from that, I got involved with a second scheme. But also, they went on and made their own TV programme when community television was quite good. There's actually a really lovely video which someone's just put onto DVD showing them talking about their first scheme and how they did it and how they organised it. It's very idealistic. It's a really great view. I've got the details if anyone wants it. It's just great. There's no health and safety. There's nothing. It's actually deadly scary seeing what they were doing. There's people just wandering around on roofs in shorts and all sorts of things. It's great. But it just showed the idealism of those early schemes, which has got lost. John referred to that. It got lost in bureaucracy. So that was the first scheme, that range of different types of houses in different sites. So those schemes weren't so much a community really, because they were, 2 houses here, 2 houses there, 4 houses there on sites. This is the second scheme, the one that I was on in Lewisham. 13 houses. All the houses were basically the same style house, but we could do the internal layouts ourselves. So it could be 3-bedroom. I think one person had 4 bedrooms, somebody only had 2 bedrooms, and people altered the room layout as their needs changed. There's a story which I never know is a popular or not, about that someone's son left home to go to work, and as soon as they got, they kind of took a couple of walls down and took their bedroom and made the living room bigger, and that was kind of a way of saying you're out. So this scheme now, most of those houses, I think all of them are now owner-occupied, and they've been hugely modified. John referred to this. Everyone has bought different houses. They've done in very different ways. They've modified them. One person has produced it, I think, very nearly to passive house standards. People put extensions on them. One person's put a huge German glass extension on the back of their house. Very, very good. But most of the people that live in that actually are buying into that community that was there. It's quite famous, and there's an amazing community, although it's actually only, I think, 3 of the original people living there still. I don't live there now. They still have a party every year. They have live bands. They have open house days, things. So it's still a very vibrant community, although it's a lot of different people. People have bought into that. They know it's a bit of a scene there, which is quite interesting because they weren't obvious houses to buy. They're a bit unusual, and getting mortgages could have been quite difficult, but people wanted that community side of it. So a couple of other shots. That's the house I built, but it's been hugely extended and improved since I lived there. And that's another one. It looks better because they're all nice and sunny. And a lot of other things came out of it, like a lot of skills that came out. I was the chair of the group, so I learned a lot about dealing with architects and council officials and funders and all those sort of things. And also just working with a group, which I will look at some more in a moment, but kind of keep the group together. The guy who built this house is a really good carpenter. He went on to build other quite famous houses. He built John's house. I worked with John to build his house. Sarah Wigglesworth house, didn't he? And that's that one. And he's gone on now. He's quite he does really complex building projects. He was a jobbing carpenter when he started, but he got a lot more confident about building and went on to do a range of things. So there was a lot came out of that group of just people having much more confidence about doing building work and just more confident in themselves as a person, which was really, I mean, it was a big changing thing for me. I'm now on the international lecture circuit. So some other schemes that came out there, what happened was, because I had a background in community work and community arts, there was a scheme set up in Peckham for young homeless. And it was a scheme, 9 houses for people who all young, single and homeless. And the idea was they would build their own homes, live in them, and at the same time get some qualifications. The scheme was massively overcomplicated, but in the end we did do it. That's some of the group. This was a few years ago now. We built 9 single-person units, very, very highly insulated houses in 2 terraces, and no car park in the area, so there's kind of communal area in the middle. And it was a very complicated scheme. I think it was a bit over-ambitious to expect those young people to do what they did. They had to go, I think it took us about 18 months, and we had quite a nasty arson attack and things. But in the end, we did get a core group of people right through the whole build. So they all did in the end move into their houses. They all ended up with NVQ level 2 in carpentry and joinery. And in the end of the scheme, none of them had ever had a proper job before. One of them had done some work in Burger King. But within 3 months of moving in, every one of them was in full-time employment. And that was almost exclusively for 2 reasons. One was they really didn't want second-hand furniture from the Salvation Army, which they were offered. They were desperate to go to IKEA. That was the big thing. We used to go to IKEA on Fridays when the scheme was nearly finished, just to look at furniture. They were so good, keen to have. These houses were beautiful, and they just wanted somewhere decent, really nice furniture. They wanted it to be there. They didn't want to have broken settee from the local Salvation Army. That was a big thing for them. They'd lived on the streets for a long time, and they wanted somewhere that was warm and comfortable, and they could invite people around. So this guy here, he became quite a good carpenter. He's still a carpenter. He did marry a German millionaire, but he still lives there, and he's still a carpenter. He goes over and sees us sometimes. I never got the full story on that one. He's a carpenter. He's a bit of a Jack the Lad. And the other guy at the back there, he's runs Hackney councils. He does the maintenance in schools for Hackney councils. So, I mean, I don't know if he still does. The one woman that made it all the way through the scheme was a bendy bus driver in London, which she could handle. She was scary. So. And we lost one person. But the thing about that was that the scheme was very well supervised for the young people. They had a lot of support. I was there on the site 5 days a week with them, and they had a support worker. So there was someone there dealing with their things like social security and things like that, because they were always running out of money on the second week. And actually, I don't smoke, I bought hundreds of cigarettes on that scheme. It was the way I could get them to actually finish the scheme. It was like, I'll buy you 20 fags if you just finish the cladding, It was, so, yeah, but we got it through. And what we did was, and this is the important part of this, is we did a lot of team building work with them. We went off to Wales, except for this guy from Hackney who said, I don't do outdoors. But with the rest of them, we went up to Wales, we did team building, we did canoeing, we made rafts, all that sort of stuff. And they'd never been there, they really they hadn't been out of London, any of them, I think. There was a great question about when I asked someone that said, what are all these sheep for? I thought, that was my favourite question. Anyway, but we know there was an immense amount of support. We lost quite a few in the early stages, but once we got on site, we pretty much kept, I think we lost one person during it. And they were a difficult group, most of them hadn't been to school in secondary school. 2 of them, the guy from Hackney and the other one, we got them through GCSE maths and English as well. because they didn't have any of those skills. And that involved physically me driving them to the school, because they got such a school phobia thing. They wouldn't actually go through the door. But we got it, so there's a lot of things like that. So they came out of that with all those qualifications. The difficulty was that as soon as the scheme was finished, all the support for them went away. And that was a really bad point of the scheme. We couldn't get anyone to do any more. So for a while, I was actually really hoping that none of them got a job, because at the time, if you're on social, then they paid the rent. And I was worried that if they wouldn't pay the rent, and so they'd get evicted and things. But they, all but one, I think, lived there for quite a long time. The problem then became that once they got partners and children, the houses weren't suitable, and then they had to go out. But those buildings have remained, and then now other people have moved in, and apparently it's working quite well. Went through a bad patch. But one of the good things was that the houses were fantastically well insulated, so their running costs were really low, which was really important for them. So those are... So what needs to be in place to get that to work? We needed to do team building. They had to be able to work as a group. And young people like that very much don't want to work as a group. They've actually got a way of working. They're very independent. It sounds rude to say, but they're selfish. The way they've got through being in a really tough situation, the sort of situations I couldn't live with myself. Really, really tough. Is they've had to kind of really focus on themselves, and actually getting them to share and work with other people was actually quite difficult. So dealing with conflicts, obviously a huge amount of conflicts on site. We had ways of dealing with that. We dealt with it. Looking at individual and group responsibilities, what their responsibilities were in terms of the quality of the work they did when they appeared, health and safety, looking after other people, cleaning the toilets, that sort of thing. Core skills like maths and things I've referred to. How to build the house, we had to obviously do training as we went along about the next stage and what they needed to do. Getting accredited qualifications, NVQ. And then the other couple of things that were quite interesting was that some of them, 2 or 3 of them especially, were very good at then going out and talking to people. And they could talk to architects. They went into architectural practice and other self-build groups. And they were really, when they started, they were cocky. And when they were doing it, they were confident. There was a real big difference. They could talk sensibly to people, answer questions. It was a huge change for them. It was really, that was quite exciting. And we did interview techniques and things like that with them. So there's these kind of follow-on skills. So the outcomes were they got the MVQs, most of them had jobs, and generally the self-confidence had improved massively. The scheme John referred to earlier, Mark's Tay, a group of people there, as John was saying, one person in every house had severe disability in some ways, and they worked to design the houses around their needs. So each house was specifically designed. And John did refer to this, but one of the things I think was interesting when I met with them was that they wanted to be able to be involved in the design. They didn't want someone who was an outside expert coming saying, this is what you need. They didn't want the house to look like a hospital. They didn't want loads of handles and cords and everything like that. They wanted the minimum they need to make the house look as nice as possible, but would work for them. So the modifications were very different than what if an outsider had come in and started doing it and saying, you need this, you need this, you need this. They understood what they need. The architects worked closely with them to sort of design special kitchen units, allowing for special wheelchairs to be able to turn and things like that. So they were much more confident about that, and they were able to talk to other groups. The interesting thing was that the chair of that group was very good. He had a heart attack as soon as he'd finished and was in a wheelchair. And so the house actually for a while worked perfectly for him, and then he gradually got better. But in another situation, he might not have been able to stay living in the house. So it was good. That was a very nice little scheme. I think it's a shame there wasn't more of it. So this was a panel system built on site, and they, as John said, they used family and friends to build the houses. And one guy was very good at kind of poncing stuff as well, so I think he got all the insulation for next to nothing, and from somewhere I don't know. Probably don't want to know. So as you can see, these houses are just really nice houses, lots of sheltered walkways and car parking and things. I haven't been there for a long time, but it was lovely when I went. Mark's Tay, out near Colchester. Yeah. This is the Hedgehog self-build scheme, which I was site manager of in Brighton, which was featured on Grand Designs. The very first series of Grand Designs, where no building in the whole of the first series of Grand Designs was finished anywhere near. So every one of them was faked up. So we were on it, and there's a lovely scene with us all sitting in a living room with them, and it was just plasterboard nailed to the wall, and we put a settee there, and then took it all down afterwards. But we got loads of freebies, because at that time Grand Designs was new, we got battery drills. It's not harder now, I think. So this was a scheme on Brighton. I've forgotten how many houses. I've built them. 10 houses. Individual bungalows on a beautiful site overlooking the right at the back of Brighton. So it's a stunning site they got. It'd been empty for a long time. Loads of problems with neighbours. Neighbours really didn't want this site to happen. One guy in particular just had a really nasty vitriolic campaign against the scheme, which caused enormous problems for several months after we got on site. He put out a leaflet saying it was a drug rehabilitation project. It was a collective of South London prostitutes. He just did leafleting out and everything. It was really horrible. But eventually got on site. So it's detached bungalows. It's a very low density on the site, right at the back of Brighton. And some scenes. So what was interesting about that was that everyone who was in housing need. They were generally in fairly poor housing in Brighton, and there's a lot of really bad. Everyone thinks Brighton's really funky, but actually there's a lot of really bad housing in Brighton, and most of them were in very small terrace houses with no front gardens or anything like that. So the kids had never played out or anything. They were just generally stayed in their houses. And when we built the scheme, we did the scheme. A lot of the families had one person being part-time employment. There was some that were, I think the 3 that were unemployed, but they're generally in part-time and working on the site. When the scheme finished, especially the women, apparently I wasn't there at the time, but the women got together and said, what do we do now? This has been a focus of our life for 18 months. We've been on site working, we've been looking after the kids. We built a creche on site, so they would do creche time, and they were supporting the self. But they were as active builders as anyone else. But none of the women had actually ever had full-time jobs. And they actually kind of sat around and said, what do we do now? And it was interesting that one of them has gone to university and got a doctorate. One other woman runs a project for young people who with learning difficulties. Another one runs a local community centre. 2 of them work in museums. They got qualifications after doing this. They felt much more confident about going out and doing that sort of thing. But the other thing is, that I think is really interesting, is that they're really active in the community. So they are things like school governors. They work in local community organisations. They do talks, they do presentations around Brighton. They're involved in other community organisations in Brighton. They became a very dynamic group of very skilled people. And we did quite a lot of work on that group. And one of the things we did a lot of work with was on conflict resolution. So that when the scheme was getting off the ground, my partner is qualified in this sort of stuff. And she said that she would run a course for them in dealing with conflicts. And they said, we don't need that because we're all mates, we're fine. And so she said, you need it now, before you start falling out, because you will fall out. Having 10 or 4 families working a very cold winter on a site, it's the level of tension sometimes can be very high. I personally think dealing with a group is harder than dealing with a build. Keeping the group together, and if you don't keep the group together, there's no point in doing it. And we'll look at that right at the end. So she did this conflict resolution. Every time there was a problem, we had a system that went through, and we got the whole group through. And with one exception, basically. The group are still very solid, and they all still live there. They've been in those houses 13 years. Nobody's moved out. And they're not, everyone's a bit kind of gets overdoing community. They're not in each other's houses all the time. They sometimes go weeks without seeing each other. But they all know who, if there's some problem, they know who they can turn to. If they can't get the kid to school, they know they can knock on the neighbour and say, can you take my kid to school and things. And it's a very solid community of people. I think, picking up on one of the points that someone said earlier, I do think it'd be interesting, though, if they get the right to buy, because they're rented, is whether that's going to change things. Suddenly if they got the chance to buy kind of a nice house in the back of Brighton, and then they could put that on the open market, whether they would see that as worth doing, or whether they would want to start. It'd be interesting to see how that one works out. We had lots and lots of meetings, as you can imagine. There's always meetings on sites. And one just nice little sideline from it, when we'd finished, all the people had children, all but one, I think. And the scheme was nearly finished. And the kids came to me, they were about 5-year-old, most of them, and with an agenda. And they said, we want to have a meeting. And what they wanted me was, they wanted me to take them to B&Q, and they could choose the colour of their bedrooms, because they'd been told they had to have white, and they didn't want it. So I had to take, they set up this agenda and said, Geoff, so I had to take the kids down to B&Q and let them choose the colour paints. This was fun. But it is a really solid community, and they've got a lot of group skills which they've passed on to other groups. They do talks to other groups, they support other organisations and things like that, and that's a real bonus, I think. I run Self-Build courses with Centre Alternative Technology, and a lot of the other people who have been involved in Self-Build have gone out and done things like that. So sort of scenes, these are, that's me, back of me, Pat Bora's Centre Alternative Technology. He's the architect there, and he's in there's a scheme in Bristol called Water Street, in the Self-Build scheme, and he did. Hey? Right. I've never seen it. I must go and look something. But he designed that. And Duncan Roberts, he's built his own house, and he's done some self-build schemes in the north, another architect. So a lot of the people have gone on and done other schemes based on that. And Jackson said he would do 1 minute on the sort of the soft outcomes from your scheme. So he's going to do. You said I spoke to you about this.
Yeah, but I'm not quite sure what you wanted me
Well,
to do.
what effect do you think the scheme had on your group and those sort of outcomes?
Yeah,
Rather than the fact that you organise things like this.
So the other stuff around the non-building side.
Yeah.
So I guess out of the people that were there, we had one guy became an electrician, so he could then work on the project. There's this project, it doesn't say it, does it? It's the Ashley Vale project in St Werburgh, which is in Bristol. So yeah, one guy became an electrician, one guy became a plumber, so he could work on his house and others. Quite a few people end up getting general building skills, carpentry skills and things. So about 7 people have gone off doing work in the world of carpentry and building. One guy became a postman. So I think what other sort of the elements around sort of more outreach. I guess there's lots of people work in kind of areas where there's a kind of, I guess, a greater input. There's quite a few people work in Sustrans that live on the site as well. Yeah, but generally people have used the skills and the confidence of being involved in the project to go on and do more stuff.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I did want to say it for you, because
right.
and also you want to set up organisations like this. So yeah, based on that. So very briefly to sum up, if you're going to pull that one together, I do think these are the things, and this is not just for schemes, this is for individuals as well. The first one is you've got to have a practical time scale. Group self-build schemes, I don't think should be, I think 18 months are the absolute maximum. I think it's really hard to do 2 winters. So if you're trying to keep a group together, with the levels of things that are around now, like prefabrication things, I think you can speed things up. But 2 winters for a group is really hard going. And what always happens is the group plan to get on site in March, get the outside work done, and then get indoors by November. And what happens is they get on site in November and start with all winter working outside. So basically design a scheme to get on site in November, and hopefully by then it will work out right. So a sensible time scale, things like that. A sensible budget. I mean, it's no point in trying to do it if the budget isn't going to work out. People ring me up and say, I'm looking at doing a self-build. How much would a 3-bedroom house cost? You can't do it like that. The budget has got to be genuine. You know, you've got to know if it's a group scheme or an individual thing. You've got to be a practical budget. It's a nightmare if you're trying to do, especially a group scheme, and you spend the whole time saying, well, we don't have enough money to do this, you know, and people are breathing down your neck for money and things. So, sensible budget. Buildability, you know, make sure the houses are, you know, buildable by the group that you've got. You don't want to do excessively complicated building, especially with group things, because it just takes too long and it's too hard and too much to go wrong. Make sure the self-builders do need appropriate training, so not just, but obviously training in the jobs that they will be doing, but the other things we looked at, like the group skills, dealing with authorities, understanding their financial commitments and dealing with banks and all those sort of things. So they know. Make sure you've got someone on the scheme who can do the accounting and keep the accounting up to date, and there's keeping all those an eye on the money and things. That's a huge problem. On the self-build scheme we had one guy who said he was really good at doing all that, and we all were so happy for him to do it that we just let him do it, and he was actually useless. So it causes quite a lot of problems. And the main thing, especially for schemes, is, and this comes up time and time again, is they shouldn't promise more than they can deliver. It's better to promise less and then they'll be able to add something. But what it's a real nightmare is if you say you can have this and you can have a community centre, and groups talk to, and they say, well, what we want is, we want some houses, we want some allotments, we go to a community house at one end, maybe some workshops, and funders and especially housing associations tend to say, well, we could look at that, and those things just disappear, and it's horrible to keep taking stuff away. It's better to say we can do the basic housing, and then maybe there's some money left where we could add something, but taking stuff away is a real nightmare. So I do think those sort of things have to be in place to get the scheme to work. And it's interesting, it's not just group schemes. Two final points. I went to see a group in just outside Milton Keynes. They're all builders, and they built their own houses in a group scheme, and it was tea break, and the guy was saying that not one of us talks to anyone else, and within 6 months of moving in, every single person has sold up because they'd fallen out so badly during the build. So that didn't work. And someone just near me has just finished building his own house, and the experience has been so bad because he budgeted wrong, fell out with all his neighbours and everything, that he's actually put the house up for market and moved out and living in a flat because he can't stand being in the place. So that's what can go wrong. So it's worth having these things in place and making sure you're constantly monitoring that. So that's it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Geoff.